Okay, we're devoting today to the topic of church government. So we'll be starting on page 124, although our section on church government actually begins a few pages before that, but I wanted to give a broad overview of the different positions of church government. This is what I want to do is I want to present to you the different views in a survey fashion, but then I want to spend most of our time actually looking at Bible passages, which will help us conclude what we should on the issue of church government. Church government is one of those issues where there's a lot of disagreement across Christendom and also within evangelicals. We don't find any one specific passage in the Bible that says, "Thou shalt use this form of church government." And so sometimes people have looked at this particular issue as one in which perhaps it's not really the form that matters at all. It's just mostly, if you have godly people involved. I think that's a little bit of a oversimplification. I do think it's true that you don't find any one passage that says thou shalt have this particular form of church government, but I think there's enough information in Scripture that really points us in a certain way. Doesn't mean that there may not be some real disagreements on some areas, on some points. But I don't think it's the case where all of them can just be equally valid and it just doesn't really matter which one you choose. I don't think that's the case. So let's introduce the various forms. I've gone back and forth in my mind. Should we just start with the Bible passages dealing with church government, or should we, explain the various forms? I've decided that I want to start with explaining the various forms, but we will spend most of our time in Bible passages. But if I introduce the options that are out there, then when we start looking at the passages, we can start making connections in our head and say, this seems to, be a support for this particular form of government, or perhaps the other way around. When you look at forms of church government, if you were to pick up a standard systematic theology, most times forms of church government are presented in three categories. An Episcopal form of church government, a Presbyterian form of church government, and then a congregational form of church government. So you might be led to believe that there's, three options that are out there. And although I think it is correct that when it comes to major categories that you can say that there's three major categories of church government, particularly when you get into the congregational form of government, I think there's various subdivisions within the congregational. So actually, when I think about this particular topic, I think there's probably 5 or 6 different options when it comes to forms of church government, particularly if you're counting several within the congregational form. So let's do a brief explanation of the forms, and then we'll start looking at some Bible passages and trying to make some sound conclusions. First form of church government is what we refer to as the Episcopal form. And the Roman Catholic Church, we often think of in regard to this, although they're not the only one. You do have the Eastern Orthodox and the Anglican that would also hold to this as well. But with the Episcopal form of government, and by the way, as we're looking at these, the key defining factor when we're trying to figure out a form of government is where does the authority lie? When it comes to the ultimate decision making, where is the power for that? So with the Episcopal form of government, authority resides in the office of the bishop, and a bishop is distinct from elder and is over other church officers. So one thing you will see with an Episcopal form of government is an elevation of the bishop, who would be over an elder, and then who would be over other officers like a deacon. So it's a 3-tier approach. One of the most significant things about the Episcopal form of church government is its elevation of bishop over elder. And that'll be one issue that you need to think through when you're looking at the Scripture. Does the Scripture indicate such a distinction between an elder and a bishop? Or are they basically the same person, perhaps emphasizing different functions? So with an Episcopal form, you have a bishop, an elder, and then other officers in the church as like a deacon. Of course, in the Roman Catholic Church, the Bishop of Rome, who we know as the Pope, ends up having authority over other bishops and church officials. So if you look at the Roman Catholic setup, you have the bishop in this particular case. You even have a hierarchy within the bishops, because you end up having the Pope, who's the Bishop of Rome. He has authority over the cardinals and the bishops, and then the priest, and of course the lay people. Within the Eastern Orthodox tradition, you also have an elevation of the bishop over the other officers, but they don't have supremacy of the Bishop of Rome or the Pope as the Roman Catholics do. As a matter of fact, that ends up being one of the major dividing points and one of the things that causes separation between the Western Church and the Eastern Church, because the Eastern Church did not go for the supremacy of the Bishop of Rome or the Pope. They do believe, however, that there are bishops of various regions that do have a unique authority. Those bishops in those regions, are viewed as having basically an equal authority. So they're both affirming an episcopal form of government, although within the Roman Catholic Church you'll end up having a bishop that's elevated above other bishops. Another form of church government is the Presbyterian form of government, which is going to be emphasizing the importance of elders. One of the things that will not be true with the Presbyterian form of government is they're not going to accept this three-tier form. As a matter of fact, what you'll end up seeing there is you'll end up having elder, who is also a bishop, and then deacon. So this would be a two-tier. This would be a three-tier over here. Yes, Gus, go ahead.
From Scripture, from what I saw, I felt like there's pretty much elder and deacon, and then sometimes the deacon, other people have translated deacon as bishop, saying we can do that. Where does the three levels come from? Because I know for reading Scripture, I say deacon and elder, but position of bishop, what that
Yeah, I think it's. Well, my view would be, I think when you actually look at the cluster of the terminology together, I think this is going to be more accurate in the sense of, because you're going to end up seeing the presbyteros and the episkopos, I think, being used pretty equivalent in a pretty similar manner. So I think you're going to see some context where overseers and bishops are referring to the same individual.
So is there basically three words for different levels of the leadership in Scripture, elder, bishop, and deacon, or is it that's what I'm kind of asking?
Yeah. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but I think what you're going to see is, I think elders, overseers, of which we get the word bishop, elders, overseers, pastors, I think are going to be referring to the same individual. Okay. With different emphases of what that person does, but not like a tiered hierarchy. I think it is legitimate to talk about deacons, in a sense being, I think 1 Timothy 3 does that. I mean, it's talking about qualification for elders, and then it talks about deacons. There's similar character qualifications, although the being able to teach isn't mentioned for a deacon like it is an elder. So I think it is legitimate to talk about this, but not the distinction between the bishop and the elder. I think that ends up being more linked towards presuppositions that certain people have about the authority given to Peter in Matthew 16, and some other developments that you start to see take place in early church history. But I don't find it very biblical. With the and what we'll do is, like I said, when I get done with this survey here, we'll go through the passages and then we'll run into those issues. We'll run into where you see the various terms used side by side. With the Presbyterian form of government, again, they're rejecting the three-tier understanding. But for them, authority is with the rule of assemblies of presbyters or elders. Each local church is governed by a body of elected elders, usually called the session or the consistory, though other terms such as church board may apply. Groups of local churches are governed by a higher assembly of elders known as the presbytery or the classis. Presbyteries can be grouped into a synod, and synods nationwide often join together in a general assembly. Specific roles in church services are reserved for an ordained minister or pastor known as the teaching elder or a minister of the word and sacrament. So with the Presbyterian form of government, there's going to be a heavy emphasis on the authority of elders in the local church. But there's also, now notice I don't know if you can read this off to the side here. It's not very, it's not easy to recognize there. But I wrote the word connectionalism, because one of the things you're going to see with the Presbyterian form is connectionalism, which is the belief that the local church is connected to other bodies within the system, which in a sense, I don't want to say it's opposite of, because that may be too strong of a word, but there's going to be a difference between connectionalism and what we would call local church autonomy. Local church autonomy would be is that the authority of a church, of course, all churches are going to be under Christ, who's the head of the church. But a local church autonomy view would be is that each local church is governed by its own elder or elders, and there's no other body over the church. If a church has autonomy, it may decide and want to work with other churches in various areas, but there's no other body that has any kind of authority over it. That's different than connectionalism, which would see that local churches are connected with other governing bodies. And so you do get a hierarchy within the Presbyterian form, because you can have the local church, but you can also have a synod, and then you can also have the General Assembly. So, yes.
That's primarily for Presbyterian type churches, but
Right.
like the Baptist church, they would fall into the third category, but yet they have like the Southern Baptist is
Right.
seems to act like a...
Yeah, but those are voluntary, non-obligated. In other words, they're not bound to do that. So there ends up being a difference there, in the sense that it's more, I think, like I said, local church autonomy is not denying that there can be cooperative fellowship and voluntary, but even within that, they would still really heavily emphasize that each church, governs itself. So I think the big issue with this is, you have the local church, which is linked with a regional group, which is linked with a national group. And so there ends up being a sense in which, a local church may be influenced by other bodies outside of it. Now, sometimes those within the Presbyterian form have felt that people that are not Presbyterian have oftentimes misrepresented it by saying, that these, governing, the Synod and the General Assembly are just always pushing their way upon the local church. And some within the Presbyterian form would say that's not exactly accurate, that there really is a true authority that lies with the local church. But there is no doubt that there is influence above that. And of course, if you want to start, perhaps going to some of the more extreme examples, what do you do when the higher bodies perhaps start to be more sympathetic towards things like female pastors or, homosexual pastors and that sort of thing, but a local church isn't for those things? You get into some of those issues there. So one thing to really keep in mind with that is this idea of connectionalism. The Presbyterian form, it's rejecting the three-tier of the Episcopal. It's heavily emphasizing the role of elders within a church. But there is a connectionalism with other bodies. Then the next would be congregational. Congregational would be authority resides with the local church, which is autonomous and is not accountable to any other church or governing body. Now, again, by not accountable, I'm not saying that they don't ever work with other churches or that they don't care what other churches are doing. But the final authority really does lie with the local church itself. As I looked at some other theology books, most of them would talk about local church autonomy, but they would also throw in the word democracy as part of an essential of congregationalism. And I'm not quite comfortable with that. I do think there are some congregational churches that do have a democracy model, but it seems to me the key ingredient, the key essential of a congregational is primarily local church autonomy. So So when I'm looking at these three forms, like when I look at what makes Episcopal Episcopal, because again, as you're looking with these different models and these different forms, you want to ask yourself, what is essential to this form or system? What is essential to it, and what makes it, in a sense, mutually exclusive from the other views? With the Episcopal form of government, I mean, this is a real essential, that you can end up having bishops over elders. So you have this three-tier structure. And it's also true too. I think it would also be true too that you have you do have a connectionalism in the sense that if you're a part of a Roman Catholic Church, that's not an autonomous local church. I mean, ultimately the orders are coming from Rome. So when it comes to connectionalism, that in itself isn't a mutually exclusive issue. But so with the Episcopal form, you're having the three-tier. I think what ends up being pretty essential in regard to Presbyterian, of course, there's going to be a connection here with connectionalism, no pun intended. But the Presbyterian form is rejecting the three-tier and the elevation of the bishop over the elder. Now, what will end up making this different from Congregationalism is there will be some congregational forms will agree with that the elder and the bishop is referring to the same individual and that there's deacons. But when you get to the congregational churches, they're rejecting connectionalism. They're rejecting the idea that there's an inherent other bodies that have an influence, even an authoritative influence over the local church. So I'm going to say local church autonomy really ends up being a key distinctive of Congregationalism. That is something that you don't see with Presbyterianism or the Episcopalian form of government. Now, as I mentioned, when you pick up some systematic theologies, they just mention congregational and almost leave it there. It's like, okay, here's the three main forms. But notice I have 5 different forms of the congregational. I think that you can have local church autonomy and then there can be 5 different ways that you can go with this local church autonomy. One of them is no government. And when with the Brethren movement in the 19th century, there were some who tried to emphasize that there really shouldn't be any government at all, since there's a priesthood of all believers, that there's an equality that is there with the body of Christ, that there's really shouldn't be any form of government. So with this particular view, there is no government since a structure is viewed as unspiritual and contradicting the priesthood of all believers. Again, I think that's something that perhaps may sound good to some in theory, but in practicality, there almost always ends up being leaders that pop to the top. Another form of congregationalism could be single elder authority, where the congregation elects the elder pastor whose authority can vary from church to church. In some instances, though, the single elder possesses full authority. So that would be a case where you end up having, one guy who's the main enchilada in the church and mostly calls the shots himself, so a single elder authority. Then another one would be and there's going to be, and we'll have to do some distinctions here between C and E, because they're close, but there's a little bit of a distinction here. C would be elder-led, but congregational authority. Elder-led congregational authority. This is where you would have elders are viewed as leaders in doctrine and example and making decisions on the everyday functions of the church. But the final authority in choosing leaders and deciding on important matters resides with the congregation. Thus, elder-led, but not elder-rule. So, with that particular form of congregationalism, one thing that would separate this from this is that with B, the single elder authority, there's basically one guy who's the leader. But with this, you would end up having multiple elders. So there would be elders that would be chosen, and like I said, they usually do the primary teaching, the leading, A lot of the day-to-day decisions that need to be made, particularly as the church gets bigger and bigger, there's, as the church gets bigger with more issues facing it, it's harder for the whole congregation to be involved with every single level. So they'll be doing that, but the ultimate authority still lies with the congregation. So hypothetically, if there's a big church decision on a building project or a hire or something like that, there could be the consensus or the unanimity of the elders, but the congregation may vote another way, and they're the ones that have the final say. By the way, as I try to think through the various systems, I try to think of, if there ends up being a major disagreement on a really big issue, who wins? So when you ask that question and you come to the answer on that, that's really in a sense where the ultimate authority is. So now we know in practice that if you end up having such a divergence between the leaders and then the congregation, that's a recipe for disaster, and that's a recipe for trouble. Okay, then you have pure democracy. Pure democracy, it'd be different from no government, because the no government view basically views any kind of government as unspiritual. Pure democracy believes in a democratic form of government in the church, which would be all decisions are made by the congregation in a democratic manner, which would mean they're all voting and making the decisions as a unit, as a congregation. But again, as a church gets bigger and things get more complicated, it's harder to do that. And then the final form here would be multiple elder rule. Final authority in all matters, including the choosing of other elders, resides with the elders and not the congregation. So what's the difference between C and E? The final authority, even on very difficult matters, will be with the elders. So again, hypothetically, and this isn't always hypothetical, but just to play it out hypothetically, the elders want to do a building project, but the congregation as a whole doesn't want it. Well, with a true elder rule, the say would go with the elders, because they're the ones where the final authority is. Now, of course, in reality, again, that would be a disaster. If all the elders are saying, okay, we're going to go X, and the congregation's not with them at all, that's a recipe for disaster. I was talking to one individual who, as he operated and fully agreed with multiple elder rule, did acknowledge that there ends up being, even if you end up having elder rule, there still is a way in which the congregation gets to vote. They get a vote with their feet, and they get a vote with their pocketbook. So that was one thing, coming from a man who strongly believed in E, acknowledging that you do have the reality of the other. See, was there a question? Okay, go ahead.
So with true democracy and no government, no government, I guess, what is that like? They basically they have like their ministry staff and they just do their job. But pure democracy, everything is voted on. I mean, how could
I think with pure democracy, I mean, to me, the no government one, to me, that's just basically theory. I mean, whenever you get multiple people together, there always ends up being somebody has to come forward to offer some sort of leadership. I think the thing probably between A and D is acknowledging that there does need to be order and structure and even government. It's just democracy. So I think that would be the key difference.
It's a general rule, right? Because if you have a pastor, I mean, they're not voting on what passage he's going to preach the next week, or
within the pure democracy.
Right.
Yeah, I usually don't. I mean, usually it wouldn't come down to those.
Is Calvary Chapel pure democracy then? Or where do they fall?
Calvary Chapel on that?
Single elder authority.
Single elder, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't think
So
it would
like
be in the
pastor,
pure
elder,
democracy.
or-
Yeah. So, I think mostly like within our circles, I think most of, well, let's just put it this way. When I talk about our circles here, I'm talking about Master Seminary and those who come within the Master Seminary system. I think most of the discussion is going to be in the realm of the congregational, because we don't have too many Episcopalian. Now we do have some that oftentimes that will come that have had a Presbyterian background, so there may be some relevance there. But I think usually within our circles, it's usually between B, C, and E. And probably even more narrowed will come between C and E. Right. Go ahead, Jordan.
Why would letter E be under congregational? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Because the key defining factor is local church autonomy. That ends up being the key. Because like I said, when you read some theology books, they'll end up putting democracy as a. If you end up making democracy an essential of the congregational form of government, then you wouldn't have this underneath it. As a matter of fact, I've tinkered with this. As I've taught this course throughout the years, as I was doing my study on it, as I was trying to nail down, okay, what is essential of a congregational form? I was reading different things from different sources, from different experts in the area, and there actually was a time where I singled this one out as a fourth category.
Or B too, right?
Or B.
Like a one pass.
Yeah, in the sense, right. And there's right, because any time where it doesn't just flat out come down to the congregation, so yeah, I think you could include B in that as well. So, but as I started to think about it, and I actually spent, I don't want to make it sound like I did some formal Gallup poll or something like that, but I talked to a lot of different people. And like I said, I was almost kind of getting kind of a 50-50 split on that as far as, do you see elder rule as a subset of congregationalism or its own distinct form of government? And so I think there's not a consensus on that. As I look at it myself, I've just decided that I don't think it's quite right to just say democracy is an essential of congregational. I think the key thing ends up being local church autonomy. So thus a church could have elder rule, but still be autonomous, because within that elder rule, you could have a setting where no other church has any kind of say over it or any other kind of body, which happens a lot. Go ahead.
I mean, pretty much everybody, associated with masters, everybody else typically falls under congregational. Now, when I read the scriptures, it seems like there's really not congregational, though. It's more, connectionalism, because, you have, obviously, it's a different era, and you have the apostles, but, Paul could be sending Timothy somewhere, and it seems that they do have authority over the local body and church. And
Okay, so you're talking even like with church planning?
Yeah, like church planting, or, in the early church history, and then obviously I would think in millennial and the eternal kingdom, we're not going to have, obviously Christ is ruling. There's not going to be a, congregational rule. It seems also there's going to be that connectionalism. From where's the biblical arguments for and against kind of
Big biblical argument for what specifically?
like congregational or like connectionalism, because I don't really see that in script.
You don't see connectionalism. Is that what you're saying?
No,
or you do?
I see more connectionalism.
You see more connectionalism.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't go that route.
When we go through the text, we'll work through that issue. I would just say that I do think that those within our model, I think, do primarily work within a congregational. Like I said, congregational is not ruling out participation. It's not even. I still think you can be congregational local church autonomy even with church plants. I know, like the church plants that I've been involved with in churches where, as we would establish churches in other areas, the goal was to get them to have autonomy. So of course there would be that time period, whereas we're starting something, there's reliance on the mother church, there's financial, there's directional, and even our elders would be in charge. But the goal was to get them to be autonomous. And the experiences that I was involved in, that happened in every case. It may have took 2 years or 5 years or 6 years, but in the cases that I'm thinking of, they ended up being autonomous. And as a matter of fact, we even had a celebration to celebrate their autonomy as the baton has been passed. So I do think even church planning can be done within that. Now, I will grant that may not always be the case in theory, that there can be church plants and connections and stuff where there ends up being really heavy influence. You could even call authority coming from another group. But those are things you have to work through. Yep, John, and then we'll go here. Yep.
I know there's implications for all these, but interestingly, on the third one there, the church that we came from in Scottsdale, Phoenix area, they have that model, and the elders have agreed to do like a building project, like you're saying.
Right.
And of course, there's a lot of money in this church, and there's, media programs, all the stuff they use, but they're like, they're trying to manipulate the congregation into agreeing, to backing this building project. And you can see how, like, the videos they kind of drum up and they create are all used to like manipulate. To persuade the congregation
Yeah.
to do what the elders want.
Okay.
And there's this, it's a big church, and there's like this fight now with the people in there because they're like, I don't think we need this, to spend
Right.
all these millions of dollars on these buildings.
That's an interesting analogy.
But when you have the elders have all this money, I mean, it's like they're hiring like production companies to make these videes to like manipulate the congregation.
What's funny is some may call that leading, and others may call it manipulation.
It's just, you watch the videos and
Yeah.
you're like, I mean, like, it's just amazing. Bait and switch, the way they use these tactics in these videos to manipulate the congregation. And
Right.
I just
Yeah,
totally relate.
and that's what's going to lead you to another area, which we won't get into today, but we will next week, which is when you get into the whole issue of the qualifications of the leaders. That's when obviously it dives into the whole character issue. I mean, because faith, there is a lot of truth to that. The godliness of the leaders is going to go a long way towards the success of that church, in the eyes of the Lord. So there's no doubt. Let's just be clear. I mean, you can land on the very precise form of church government you should, but if the character qualities aren't there and things aren't being done right, that can, this doesn't guarantee that things are going to go great. Is there back here, and then we'll come here. Okay.
I was just going to say, you brought the example of having a hierarchy being bad. They choose to have women elders or something. It's forced upon your local church. That could be bad. But I mean, I've been in a church now with 3E, which is great. But I could also see how having not like a hierarchy to report to or something, but somebody. Like that can also be
Benefits
yeah,
of
good thing,
mutual
too.
accountability to some
Yeah.
degree, right?
So that's like almost like, could you have a 3E where the elders of that church make all the decisions, but there's also maybe like a doctrinal commitment to.
I think so.
I mean.
Yeah, I think there can be, voluntary connections with others, and yeah, I mean, I think that has taken place, and I think that can be a good thing. I still think that's a little bit different than offering the control of the church to another group, but of course, I think it can be wise to, to partner and to be involved and to, that can be very wise. Okay, Tavis, and then we'll go this way. Go ahead.
It's kind of the same thing that, would you say that congregational is more of an American phenomenon or not?
I would say democracy is more of an American phenomenon, but I would argue autonomy from the early church. I mean, I think there's a difference.
Why is autonomy the goal? Because it seems that with, a Presbyterian or a, I guess the model that, the conventionalism would lend more to unity between churches besides this, self-autonomous structure that, it seems it can lead to rogue type of churches like we've seen in our country with certain Baptist, churches just going off, whether it's King James only or protesting funerals.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
I
kind
see
of
the
stuff
point.
happens.
But it also cuts the other way too, as far as if the bigger, broader body goes liberal or wrong. I guess the issue is going to come down to is because what we're going to do is we're going to go through. I've identified what would appear to be the dozen or so most key passages in regard to it. So we'll just go through those and see. I think what you're going to end up seeing is. I don't think you're going to see a "thou shalt have" local church autonomy, but I think you see that more evident than a connectionalism. So I think the key will be is what does the New Testament seem to be indicating us towards, or taking us towards. Jordan, we'll come
I was
to
going to ask about C. It has different degrees, right? Would it have different degrees? Because I'm saying that because I know that Grace Church, if a new pastor is elected, the congregation would have to vote on it. But I feel like it would be usually under E, Grace Church. So I'm just wondering.
Right. Yeah. I see. So is your question? Can there be even variations within C.
Yeah.
Are you saying this Grace Church?
Right.
I don't think we
This
vote.
Grace
Yeah.
Church doesn't vote on
Yeah.
They
it.
said that
it's E.
if they choose a new pastor, there will be a vote. That's a new boost system. So that's.
Pastor
You don't
teacher,
vote on it.
so John leaves it.
It's just for show.
But so they would fall under C then, if that's true.
Well, yeah, I'm under the impression that it's E,
Yeah.
but I'd have to look into that that example you're giving. I'm not.
It may be that when they elect somebody, they may
Mhm.
open it up to
Yeah.
say if anybody has a character qualification that's against this person.
Right, that's a good point. Multiple elder rule churches oftentimes will seek the congregation's approval, but not perhaps in the sense of the final authority, but their input. I don't want to say that happens all the time, but it does happen where, like I said, when you're dealing with a form of church government, I would say within each of these there can be abuses. Like I said, I think sometimes when they hear about multiple elder rule, oftentimes they think of the negative abuses that have taken place, and there's no doubt that does. But let's just put it this way, multiple elder rule does not mean that elders never take into account what the congregation says. So even when it comes to choosing a leader or choosing an elder, the final authority will come with the elders, but they can still present that person before the congregation. Hey, we're looking at this guy, but you as a congregation have been dealing with him and you see him, and if you have any concerns, let us know. And so it's not mutually exclusive to congregational participation. Is there one more? Tyler, okay.
Yeah, it seems that congregationalism would lend towards independent churches. Could you give an example, or are there particular denominations that are more prone towards each of those particular types under congregationalism?
Within congregationalism?
Or is there specific
Yeah.
examples you could give of the different?
Well, yeah, I mean, with the no government one, that the Brethren movement was kind of like that. I think when it comes to single elder authority, I think when you get into like the Baptist and even the Southern Baptist, you're going to get some variety within that. So I definitely think you could see that within the Baptist, within the elder-led but congregational authority. I think there's a lot of growing number of Baptist churches and even independent churches that would be within that. Pure democracy, like I said, that almost tends to be more theory. Multiple elder rule, and you do have some Baptist churches that are within that. I think there's a lot of non-denominational independent churches that are involved with that.
And how would you compare denominationalism to connectionalism?
Well, I would say you can have certain denominations with connectionalism and others that aren't. Like I said, the Southern Baptists have a lot of cooperation amongst their churches, but they're still emphasizing local church autonomy. So in that case, you can have that. But of course, within Presbyterian and Reformed, you're going to have the connectionalism. Okay, so those are, yeah, right.
Two-tier system?
Yeah, within the congregational would be this, which would be rejection of only the Episcopal has the 3-tier. Okay, so now that hopefully has us thinking in the categories. Now what we do is, we really haven't solved anything with this list, right? I've just told you what's out there. So in light of that, let's start going through the passages and start thinking, where does this, where should we be landing on this? And thus on page 112, I start talking about the various passages here in regard to church government. So again, keep in mind, amongst Christendom, we saw that there's those 3 main categories, and actually probably more like 6 categories of church government. And even amongst those that are really believe in the authority of the Bible, there's some differences. I mean, we got Presbyterians and Reform, denominations that love the Lord, and then we have, those that are other evangelicals who, go for congregationalism, and even those that are in congregationalism, there's different forms there. Both Zondervan and Broadman Holman have books on views of church government. So you can see, from even looking at those books, the arguments that can be made on the different sides. I think it is true to say that we don't have a thou shalt have this form of church government. And so therefore, there's a fair amount of people who have actually said, this isn't just a wives' tale, but you do hear this time, that, well, since the Bible doesn't tell us about church government, the main thing is the character and the godliness of the people that are involved in the church government. And of course, I want to affirm character and godliness being crucial for a church working well and doing what it's supposed to do. But is that the case? I actually think that's an oversimplification. I do think that we can study the Bible and start to take some of these forms and take them off the table as legitimate options and start to narrow in on what appears to be more biblical. So, and just so this may help you, I debated whether I should have you be looking at page 110 and 125 at the same time, but I think I will, just to, in addition to page 112, which we'll be looking at, I also have a page 125 where I've categorized the verses that are being used by the different camps. So if that helps you when you're thinking through this issue. For example, the Episcopal form, there's going to be a pretty heavy reliance on Matthew 16 and then church history. When you get to the others, you're going to see that there's a little bit more support. I think where the differences are going to come between the different advocates of the different forms of church government is what gets emphasized and the implications that you're drawing from the passages. So this is a real test of your skill, the art and skill of Bible interpretation. Is as you're looking at these cluster of passages that deal with church government, perhaps you may be drawing too few implications or too many implications, wrong, correct implications, incorrect implications. You may be emphasizing one passage to the exclusion of others. And so, anyway, those are some of the issues. Now let me come back to page 112. And let's look at the one, and this is where you do your Bible drill here. Let's look at Matthew 16. Matthew 16. Of course, this is a big passage used by the Roman Catholics and their form of church government. Matthew 16, 18, and 19. Jesus says to Peter, I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven. So the Roman Catholics will take that particular verse and say that's indicating apostolic authority with Peter. Peter ends up being the rock of the church upon which Christ is building. Now, of course, you're probably aware of the debate on that, and there's a whole roaring debate as to whether that's even a correct interpretation. Others will argue that it's not Peter himself, but it's Peter's confession of Jesus as the Christ. So you get into some debate on that. But that is a passage that's being used by the Catholics. Now, it's also worth pointing out that I think the Catholics have to be right on two things in order for them to be right. Not only do they need to be right that Jesus is explicitly calling Peter the rock upon which the church will be built, but what else are they arguing for with Roman Catholicism? Apostolic succession. So we could grant, let's just say for argument's sake, we grant, okay, Peter's the rock. Does that mean all these other guys that follow Peter, are the authority of the church like Peter? Well, that seems to me to be a whole other area, and I actually think that that's very, very difficult to prove. Because then I have to have not only Peter as the foundation, but apostolic succession in the line of Peter. Because what you're seeing with Roman Catholicism is the heart of the church and the heart of church government is going to be apostolic succession. Where's the true church? It's in the line of Peter. Well, what did the reformers do with their ecclesiology? They said, no, the heart of the church is not on who's in the line of Peter, it's who's preaching Peter's gospel. That's where the church is. So it's the correct proclamation of the word of God and the gospel that makes a true church, not who's in the line of Peter. Because the Catholics are looking at the Roman reformers and saying, what are you guys doing? We have this long line that has continued all the way on, and you guys are just, saying your own thing. Where's the authority? To which the reformers said, it's in the Word of God. Right.
How does that compare to the idea that elders have to be appointed by elders, and how do you, have that group of independent elders if there wasn't that succession of elders?
Because you get the laying on of the hands, that Peter or that Paul will be talking about. So you will have that. You do have that element where you have it specifically mentioned in regard to him. And again, it also seems to be in the context of an apostolic ministry that's taken place at that time. So you have to think through the implications of that. So I don't think I think it's accurate to say the Scripture, particularly if it ends up being true that elders have any sort of authority, that they would also be involved in the choosing of leaders. So and again, where I would say as a theologian, I think there's a difference between elders in a church having an authority to choose leaders and what they deem apostolic succession, where you end up having this guy ends up having this continuing line of authority over the rest of the church. All right, so that's one of the big ones for the Episcopal. So again, just be aware, I'm going to be switching back between page 112 and page 125. And then a lot, to even broaden it beyond the Catholics, just to even the other groups that may use an Episcopal form of church government. One of their big arguments ends up being developments in church history, where particularly as you get beyond the first century, it doesn't take that long before you do start to see that there ends up being certain individuals in certain regions that have authority, certain bishops in certain regions. So some will say because you're seeing that develop pretty early on in church history, that also is evidence for there being, a singled out bishop over a region who has authority over others. Okay, now let's go. The Matthew 18 one is the church discipline passage, but I want to go more directly to Acts chapter 2 right now. So let's look at Acts 2. And again, the thing you should be doing at this point is, as we're going through these passages, again, as you look at these here, you may ask, well, how did you come up with this list? What I did was I went through those two books on where each of them present the different views of church government. I went through those books, read the sections of the different authors, and then pulled out the passages that are the ones that are getting emphasized. So I don't want to say this is an exhaustive list, but these are the ones that are talked about as people are debating church government. So I think this is a pretty good list. So let's go to Acts chapter 2. As I told you before, I do believe that Acts 2 is the birthday of the church because it's the sending of the Holy Spirit in the new covenant capacity. Since I'm seeing the church as the new covenant community, I think Acts 2 is very significant for the church. Okay, so when you come to Acts 2, 41 to 47, we read, So we read here, So then those who had received his word were baptized, and that day there were added about 3,000 souls. So 3,000 believers in the first church of Jerusalem. Verse 42 tells us they were continually devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer, which I know this is descriptive, but that appears to be a really excellent model of what the church is supposed to do. Apostles' teaching, now in that case they actually had the apostles there. We have the apostles' teaching with our scripture, with our New Testament. So they're doing the apostles' teaching to fellowship, the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Verse 43, everyone kept feeling a sense of awe, and many wonders, signs were taking place through the apostles. Talks about that they had all things in common. Verse 44. Verse 45, they began selling their property and possessions and were sharing them with all as anyone might have need. Verse 46, day by day, continuing with one mind in the temple and breaking bread from house to house. So notice that they were from house to house. Now, can 3,000 people get into one house? No, so I take it that as you have a large number of people, that there ends up being, in a sense, breakout groups amongst the church that's in Jerusalem, and even the same with the temple, probably. So you have from house to house, they were taking their meals together with gladness and sincerity of heart, praising God and having favor with the people, and the Lord was adding to their number day by day those who were being saved. So I guess one of the questions you could ask from this, what would be some implications for the church and church government, based on this passage? I mean, we do see here that it does mention that the number was important. I mean, they did count about 3,000, and so there's a little bit of maybe informal, but you're getting a sense there of the numbers, and that ends up being somewhat important. Of course, you're seeing what they're doing: apostles' teaching, prayer, breaking of bread, and it does seem to indicate that they're meeting regularly. So, anyway, I think those are some of the implications. Gus?
This is for single. You said verses for single and elder rule.
Oh, are you looking on page 125?
Well, yeah, no, I'm saying these verses, are they for...
I would just say, I'm just saying this is us just going through passages trying to draw implications.
Okay.
Yeah, so in other words, I've given you the different forms. Now what we're trying to do is we're trying to go through to see what the Scripture says. So...
Ask me what group uses this as proof. I don't have my computer.
Yeah, I mean, let me see here. If do I mention Acts 2? Actually, don't have it. On my chart here, I don't have anybody specifically making that out as a big deal. I'm sure all the positions would see it as being compatible. Yeah, I haven't read anybody who doesn't mean they haven't, but who says, okay, this shows our view as opposed to other views. I do think what this helps show is I think it does end up showing, in a sense, could be evidence against no government in the sense of, nothing matters. I mean, it seems to be that there's numbers being kept. There seems to be some sort of order to what they're doing. Okay, now the next one here on the sheet is Acts 6. This one is going to be used by those who, again, different passages can be used by different groups. And of course, if you hold a particular view, nobody's going to say, okay, this verse refutes my view. I mean, everybody's going to claim all the verses in the end support their view, right? But the ones that end up getting singled out, Acts 6, 1-6, is a big passage for those who would argue that it's more of a democracy. So Acts 6 will be claimed by some to say that this is democracy. If you look at chapter 6, verse 1, now at this time, there's my pen. Now at this time, while the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint arose on the part of the Hellenistic Jews against the native Hebrews, because their widows were being overlooked in the daily serving of food. Okay, so here's a practical thing that's going on. Some are thinking that the Hebrew women are getting more special attention than the others. Verse 12 says, so the 12 summoned the congregation. So you have the apostles here. They summoned the congregation of the disciples and said, it is not desirable for us to neglect the word of God in order to serve tables, but select from among you, brethren, 7 men of good reputation, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we may put in charge of this task. But we will devote ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word. So here it seems you are having the concept of, hey, there's certain people that need to be focused on preaching the word, so we're going to have others do what would appear to be, more menial tasks. Verse 5, the statement found approval, or it was pleasing with the whole congregation. So what significance do you give to that? The statement found approval with the whole congregation, and they chose Stephen, a man full of faith and of the Holy Spirit, and then the others. And then in verse 6, and these they brought before the apostles, and after praying, they laid their hands on them. Okay, so those that are going more for a congregational democracy form like to single out verse 5. The statement found approval with the whole congregation. So that's, hey, that the congregation is the final authority. So therefore support for perhaps democracy when it comes into the church. What do you guys think of that? Go ahead.
Well, I mean, the elders, I mean, they're the ones that had the idea,
Right.
right?
Right.
And they, you know, the other text, I mean, they were dedicated to the apostles' teaching. So it almost seems like it's only fitting that they would say amen to what the elders had
Right.
suggested.
Right. Which again is more of it's more of a we like this than a hey, we have the final say.
You might, you know,
Right.
obviously preconceived, you know,
Yeah.
idea that
Yeah. But I think you bring up a good point. I mean, if you look at it in verse 2, who's the one initiating this? The 12 summon the congregation. Hey, we need to do something. And then what happens in verse 6? And these they brought before the apostles. I mean, that seems to indicate, that the apostles are authority.
Yeah.
So again, I would say this is a case of both and, where you have, in this sense, apostolic authority, not congregational democratic authority, but and that could be consistent with the congregation approving or being pleasing to them. So I would just say because a congregation can be pleased or approve of something doesn't mean that they have the say in, that there's no leaders that have say as well.
Because they're the ones who actually got to select the
Yeah.
seven.
But even then, I would say that's under the direction of what they're doing. I mean, leadership can delegate. I mean, I think we even see that, in churches that may be elder rule today, where leaders may say, "Hey, I trust you. As you're working under my authority or our authority, you can do whatever you want within this area." I still think that can work within the broader. Yeah, yes.
Is there could be a distinction of wise, because looking at, at a perspective like, okay, you have obviously the apostles who are, the elders, the overseers of the church, and at this point, am I correct in saying that it looks like they're appointing deacons, really?
I think it ends up having implications for, I think this will end up having implications for that, because you're dealing with those who we later on will see, that are identified as such. So I think that will fit nicely with 1 Timothy 3. Okay, the next one's going to be Acts 11:27-30. Now in verse 27 it says, "Now at this time some prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch. One of them was named Agabus, and it's talking about a famine that was going to come over the world. And then it talks about a relief effort in verse 29. But then in verse 30 it talks about, and this they did, sending it, in regard to the relief of the brethren living in Judea. And this they did, sending it in charge of Barnabas and Saul to the elders." So remember, one of our issues we have to deal with is single versus plural leadership. So here it's talking about this relief being charged to Barnabas and Saul to the elders. So it mentions elders in the plural. Okay, Acts 14:23. Acts 14:23 says, now read verse 21 for context. "After they had preached the gospel to that city and had made many disciples, they returned to Lystra and to Iconium and to Antioch, strengthening the souls of the disciples, encouraging them to continue in the faith, and saying, through many tribulations we must enter the kingdom of God." Verse 23, "When they had appointed elders for them in every church." So notice, appointing of elders in every church. So, church is being mentioned in the singular. And of course, I know you get into the issues here as far as like in Antioch and in Jerusalem, you end up having large groups of people. And so did they always meet in one place or not? I mean, I definitely think there's, according like Acts 2 indicated, that there's times where they will break off and meet in homes. But it does mention here plural elders in every church. So how significant is that? Multiple elders in a single church. It does talk about having prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord in whom they had believed. Okay, now Acts 15. Okay, this is the Presbyterian form of church government ultra passage. This is the big one for the Presbyterian form of government, because they're going to say that Acts 15 indicates connectionalism. That it's not just a local church deciding for themselves what needs to be done or decided on a doctrinal issue. There's an appeal to the broader body. So this will test your skills here. Matter of fact, I wish we had just an hour just to go through this passage itself. But in chapter 15, verse 1, it says, "Some men came down from Judea and began teaching the brethren, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. And when Paul and Barnabas had great dissension and debate with them, the brethren determined that Paul and Barnabas and some elders of them should go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders concerning this issue." So now if you back up here, you mean going back to chapter 14, it does talk about from there they sailed to Antioch, from which they had been commended to do the work of God. So they're, it seems to be linked with that area. But what do you have here going on in Acts chapter 15? I mean, the one thing that we know of is there's a gospel issue that's at stake here. You end up having, there's certain people saying that Gentiles need to be circumcised and keep the Mosaic law in order to be saved, which we know is an affront to the gospel of grace. That's not what salvation's based on. But notice how this is going to get decided. When Paul and Barnabas had great dissension, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and some of the others of them should go up to Jerusalem and to the apostles and elders concerning this issue. So, those who are connectionalists will say, well, this indicates here that in Paul and Barnabas, I mean, look at their authority, as apostles, but as they're a part of what's going on in this area, they need to go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders. And one of the things connectionalism will argue here is that even though it mentions apostles, it's not singling out apostolic authority. There's a sense in which the apostles and elders together as the higher governing body that's in Jerusalem. So in a sense, this is like the General Assembly of Jerusalem. They're going to them to make decisions to affect the churches in the other areas. Verse 3, "Therefore, being sent on their way by the church, they were passing through Phoenicia and Samaria, describing in detail and conversion of the Gentiles, and were bringing great joy to all the brethren." Verse 4, "When they arrived at Jerusalem, they were received by the church and the apostles and the elders." So notice it mentions the apostles and the elders, and they reported all that God had done with them. But then in verse 5, "But some of the sect of the Pharisees who had believed stood up, saying, 'It is necessary to circumcise them and to direct them to observe the law of Moses.'" And then in verse 6 it says, "And the apostles and the elders came together to look into this matter." And then, what's going on here is there's going to be, the debate takes, it's not so much the details of the debate that's our main focus here, but, Peter, notice that in verse 7, it does say Peter stood up. So you do have one of the apostles here, he's talking, and he's basically saying that, look, God's doing with the Gentiles what he did with us. And then at the end of verse 10, why do we want to put them under the Mosaic law? We couldn't even do it. So why do we want to, burden them with the Mosaic law if we can't do it? Verse 11, "We believe that we are saved through the grace of the Lord Jesus in the same way as they also are." Verse 12, "All the people kept silent, and they were listening to Barnabas and Paul as they were relating what signs and wonders God had done through them among the Gentiles. And after they had stopped speaking, James answered, saying, 'Brethren, listen to me.'" And what he does is he appeals to Amos 9 to indicate that the Old Testament prophets talked about Gentiles being included in the people of God. Therefore, the decision of verse 19 after that was, "Therefore, it is my judgment that we do not trouble those who are turning to God from among the Gentiles." So that's the decision. And then, if you jump over to chapter 16, it talks about that when they were traveling, it says Paul came to Derbe and then to Lystra, and then and then you have Timothy that's mentioned there. But then it'll go on to say in verse 4 that now while they were passing through the cities, they were delivering the decrees which had been decided upon by the apostles and elders who were in Jerusalem for them to observe. All right, so let's just step back now here and try to look at this in the big picture. As you're dealing with Acts 15. So what ends up happening? There ends up being a gospel doctrinal issue that's in play. Do Gentiles need to keep the Mosaic law and be circumcised to be saved? I think it's pretty clear from Acts 15 that the answer is no. They do not have to be circumcised and keep the Mosaic law to be saved. So what ends up happening here is there's discussion on this, and as they're in Jerusalem, a decision is made, and then according to Acts 16:4, the results of that are being taken to other areas. So in 16:4 it says, while they were passing through the cities, they were delivering the decrees which had been decided upon by the apostles and the elders. So one of the issues that you're dealing with here is those who hold to connectionalism will argue here that this is a case where you end up having a smaller, another area, churches from another area, church or churches, there's debate on that, going to the General Assembly of the Church of Jerusalem so that a decision could be made. And once a decision is made, then the orders are given to the other churches. So some would say this sanctions connectionalism. Sanctions connectionalism where you can have a governing body over the local churches that makes decisions in the tough areas. So my question to you, as you look at Acts 15, do you see, does this indicate connectionalism, or are there other ways? Steve?
Well, first of all, the logic where they would say apostles and elders, see, it wasn't just the apostles. That
Right.
can go the other way to say, but there were apostles. So you can't say that is a prototype
Right.
for all
Yeah.
of church history. And then also the letter they delivered, and the tone of the letter is not one of issuing a decree. It is saying, here is the conclusions we came to. It would be good for you if you followed this because it's correct, not because we're ordering you to. And then, there's a phrase about we lay no greater burden on this, which maybe could be construed as an order, but it doesn't come across as a decree. It comes across as we're shepherding you, we're trying to help you with this issue.
But would you? So just to follow the implications of that, do you think that would be optional then for the churches when it comes to what they do with the?
I don't think it'd be optional.
But you don't think that they're mandating?
I think that they should follow it because it's right, not because it's mandated.
Okay.
Maybe
All right.
I make that distinction.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Yeah.
We shouldn't, hold prescriptive,
Right.
descriptive. I just be careful because, this is a unique time in church history where decisions are being made.
Right.
We have these things now. We don't need to go to the Jerusalem Council because we have what the church
I think that's a
needs.
great point. In other words, you're pointing out there that this is what's being described of what's taking place in an era where we do have apostles. And so I think that's a great point. And that's one of the reasons why I'm suspicious about this for connectionalism is because we are dealing with apostles and apostolic authority at this time. And this is descriptive on a very key doctrinal issue to the gospel. So I personally do think it's a stretch to say, okay, this is the model for that we need to be following from this point on. And along with that, I would even, and I'll come to here in just a second. Notice that of course, the elders are there, but who ends up doing the leading? I mean, when you look at it in verse, in other words, Paul and Barnabas are talking, and then Peter talks, and then James talks. So you're still dealing, there still seems to be the apostles that are, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the book of Acts and what its genre is and how it functions. It's a narrative. It's not some kind of didactic literature. It's not something that's prescribing things to be done.
Right.
It's telling what happened in the church. So it's going to be difficult to make Acts normative and base it as a full model of exactly how the church should run. Not that we can't draw implications from it, which is good because we
Right.
are drawing implications.
Yeah, I think that's well said.
But just making sure that we have to gauge it based on other parts of Scripture as well
Right.
that actually do prescribe what the church should do.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's a good approach. Let's see, Tavis?
On the contrary, though, I would say that this probably wasn't the first or the last time that Jerusalem had something authoritative to say. Maybe it's recorded because it was such a key issue, such as what determines salvation or not. So it would be hard, it would be a stretch to say Jerusalem, the other churches had never looked to Jerusalem or did not recognize their authority. So whether or not that's prescriptive for the church throughout the rest of history, I couldn't really say, but I find it also hard to think that if that was the way that the church operated at this time, which is we look to Jerusalem, not because of its location, but because of the pillars who are there.
I think that's the key there. Why are they looking to Jerusalem?
But then once the, James, Peter, and, the pillars in Jude, and then Paul are gone, then suddenly we switch completely to autonomous churches. To me, that I need to see what happened there. Like, why
See, but I would word it differently.
Why there's such a disparity after?
I would say the shift is to the apostolic teaching that you find in the scriptures that the churches, because I think the key, that the reason why they're looking at Jerusalem is not because it's a, quote, mother governing body, which I know you didn't use those words, but I'm saying it's because of the apostles. I mean, this is a time before you do have the writings of the apostles, so they're actually going to the apostles themselves. And of course, as they pass off the scene, I think the key will be the apostles' teaching, that you're going to find there. So personally, the reason why I think there's the disconnect with the connectionalism is because of the apostolic authority that is here. So I think that's the main. I mean, because here's the deal: this is the biggest theological issue facing at this time. The Judaizers, they're trying to add Mosaic law to the gospel of grace. So this is a huge threat to the gospel. I just think it makes sense. Like, okay, this error is spreading. Let's go where the apostles are. Let's see what their decision is, and then that should settle the issue. So I do actually think there was an authoritative aspect to the decree, because in a sense this is almost like an epistle in that sense, where it's like the apostle, this is the apostles, and of course the fact that the elders are mentioned there, I don't think waters down that the apostles, they're not acting as apostolic authority, they're just acting with the rest of them. I mean, of course, I think the elders are in approval with what they're doing and agreeing and contributing, but I think it's the apostolic authority that makes it what it is.
And so then you would say in later issues within the church regarding doctrine,
Yeah.
especially the major ones, the church at that time was then turning directly to what was left from the apostles, which was the Epistle of James and the Epistles of Peter and Paul.
Because the form of the apostles' teaching is shifting as they pass off the scene. It goes from actually seeking them directly. I mean, because you just think, I know this is hard to do, and you think about it hypothetically, but if you're in their shoes at this time, and these Judaizers are doing this thing, you're naturally thinking, okay, let's go to the ones who knew Jesus. Let's have them. And where do they happen to be at this time? Pre-diaspora, or one of the forms of diaspora, in Jerusalem. And so, so in other words, I think it's the apostolic authority that they're finding there more than, we have connectionalism. We're going to defer to the bigger body. I think that's the bigger issue. Yep, Thomas?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, when I think about the situation, Paul, in Galatians 1 and 2, is talking about his ministry at the beginning and growing and stuff. In chapter 2, verse 6, when he says, "From those who seem to be influential, what they were makes no difference to me. God shows no partiality to those, I say, who seemed influential. It added nothing to me. On the contrary, when they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised, just appeared to the circumcised. And when James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived grace was given to me, they gave me the right hand of fellowship to Barnabas and me, that we should go to the Gentiles and the circumcised. Only they asked us to report of everything I was eager to do." So it seems like it's more like just making sure, hey, we're all on the same page, and it's more of a reaching out and just having unity among them. But I don't see he's making the point that he wasn't trying to receive permission from those in Jerusalem, even the pillars, and he's saying what they said added nothing to what I was doing already. Like, so
Right.
the Jerusalem council was more just clearing up an issue, a problem, because they have people from Judea saying you have to be circumcised.
Right.
And they're clearing up the fact that, okay, we didn't send them, and no, you don't have to be circumcised. They were all on the same page. So I don't see that as some authoritative synod that got together and settled a debate that Paul wasn't sure about one way or the other.
Yeah, as if Paul was seeking,
Answer.
right.
He already had his
Right,
answer.
he already had his answer, right. Good. Okay, let's move on to some of the others here. Okay, Acts 20. Here's a big one in regard to church government. I think this has some pretty significant implications for the whole bishop-elder debate. And again, I'm going to be mostly focused on the things that are most relevant to church government, not just every implication of the passage. But if you look in Acts 20:17, it says here, from Miletus, now we're dealing with Paul here, from Miletus he sent to Ephesus and called to him the elders of the church. So mentioning of elders of the church. And then, they come to him, and there's discussion of about his preaching of the gospel. Now I want you to jump down to verse 27. Again, keeping in mind that he called together the elders of the church. And then in verse 27 he says, for I did not shrink from declaring to you the whole purpose of God. Be on guard for yourselves and for all the flock, among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. So overseers, that's linked with the episkopos concept. Remember, from episkopos, some are going to translate that as the bishop. So, but he mentions overseers, and what do overseers? Well, first of all, let's make this connection here. The elders, which are presbyteros, in verse 17, are said to be episkopos in the sense of an overseer. So I think there's a sense in which you're seeing a connection here between an elder and a bishop. So they're to be overseers, notice, to shepherd the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood. So I think this would be evidence here that a person is an elder, and again, an elder emphasizes maturity and wisdom. And I would see exercising oversight as being something that an elder does. So in a nutshell, what I'm saying is I think this helps indicate that there's not this grand distinction between an overseer, bishop, an overseer, which is, and an elder. Elders oversee. They're not two different offices. And they're to shepherd, which is another important pastoral concept, the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood. Okay, then let's see. I have the Acts 21, 17 to 26. Let me see here. Actually, I'm going to skip over that. Let's go to 2 Corinthians 2:6. 2 Corinthians 2:6. Okay, now 2 Corinthians 2:6, this would be what some use as evidence for democracy rule. It's talking about what appears to be a discipline situation, because you're dealing with somebody who was under discipline. Verse 5 says, but if any has caused sorrow, he has caused sorrow, not to me, but in some degree, in order not to say too much to all of you. Sufficient for such a one is this punishment which was inflicted by the majority. So in this case, you have like a church discipline sort of issue where it's talking about punishment which was inflicted by the majority. So some would say, well, if you're dealing with this important situation of a brother who's sinned and it's inflicted by the majority, that would indicate that the congregation itself is the one that's in charge. So some will say that's evidence for congregational authority in the sense of perhaps democracy. All right, let's go to first. You know what I'll do here is let's try, because our time's running short, let's just at least go through the passages, even if we can't comment or a whole lot at this particular point. I sense we'll probably drift into next class with some of our discussion on this as well, where we can come back and hit some other things. But let's look at 1 Thessalonians 5:12. 1 Thessalonians 5:12 says, but we request of you, brethren, that you appreciate those who diligently labor among you. And then it mentions, and have charge over you in the Lord and give you instruction, and that you esteem them very highly in love because of their work. But notice it does talk about those who have charge over you in the Lord. So does that indicate that there's certain individuals that have an authority in regard to the rest of the congregation. So that would be a passage that would be used by those who believe that there's an elder authority over the congregation. Let's look at Philippians 1:1. Philippians 1:1. Paul and Timothy, bondservants of Christ Jesus, to all the saints in Christ Jesus who are in Philippi, including the overseers and deacons. Notice he calls them overseers there. So he talks about overseers and deacons. But in a lot of the other references where Paul's talking about leaders in the church, he'll call them elders. So I think the fact that he's talking about two groups here, the overseers and the deacons, and that since there's such a close connection between overseers and elders, in other passages that this may indicate, again, more of the two-tier than the three-tier. Let's go to 1 Timothy 3. 1 Timothy 3, 1-7. 1 Timothy 3, 1. It is a trustworthy statement if any man aspires to the office of overseer. Notice he's calling it the office of overseer. It is a fine work he desires to do. And an overseer then must be above reproach. So he calls it here the office of overseer, and then the overseer must be above reproach. And by the way, when it comes to the elder, and that's something we'll be looking at next week when it comes to qualifications. Right now we're just talking about structure. So forgive me for not going into more detail on the qualifications of an overseer. But he talks about aspiring to the office of overseer, and then an overseer then must, be these things. Now at this particular point, I do want you to jump over, we're a little bit out of order, but I do want you to go to Titus. Titus chapter 1. Again, here we have another epistle where we're getting specific instruction on how the church is supposed to operate. Now notice in Titus 1:5, for this reason I left you in Crete, that you would set in order what remains and appoint elders. To appoint elders, notice, in every city, as I directed you. Now this is really important for several reasons, because first of all, notice that he mentions elders in verse 5, and then what does he say in verse 7? For the overseer must be above reproach. I mean, do you get the sense that elder and overseer are referring to the same individual? They're not two separate offices. So, again, I think this is really, I think, very conclusive to me, because he's talking about appointing elders in every city, and then he talks about the overseer must be above reproach. I was thinking overseer is an elder. So this is part of the reason why I just totally reject this, the whole issue of that strong distinction between those two there. And since we're there, lost my place here. Notice also too that it talks about plural elders, in every city. So multiple elders there. 1 Timothy, when you go back to 1 Timothy 3, in verse 10, it does talk about the fact that, actually I probably should have mentioned verse 8. 1 Timothy 3:8 then goes to talk about deacons. So you have elder qualifications given in the first 7 verses, and then it talks about deacons. Deacons likewise must be men of dignity. So he singles them out as a different group. And again, you're going to see that they have high elder qualifications too as well. One of the things that seems to be missing for them is being able to teach. But he's talking about overseers / elders. Then he's talking about deacons. 1 Timothy 4:14. 1 Timothy 4:14 says, do not neglect the spiritual gift within you, which was being bestowed on you through the prophetic utterance with the laying on of hands by the presbytery, or by the elders. So there is a group here that is involved with the laying on of hands. Now, if you go to 1 Timothy 5:17-25, let's look at this. It talks about here the elders, notice plural, the elders who rule well. So it talks about elders and elders who rule well. They're the ones that are to be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. So several things here. I mean, there's a whole cluster of issues here. First of all, he does talk about elders in the plural. Then he talks about ruling well. So it seems to indicate that elders rule. Now, then you do get into an issue: are there two different types of elders? Are there teaching elders, and then there's ruling elders, or is there a sense in which there's the elders, and amongst the group of them that there's certain ones that teach well, in regard to their function? Now, we did know in what he said earlier in chapter 3 that all of them need to be able to teach. But those, the ones, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching, there may seem to be ones that are especially good at that task. Okay, let's go. I want to save about good 10 minutes or so for discussion at the end here, but let's go to 1 Peter 5. Because what we'll want to do is when we get done with these passages, start looking through the various forms of church government and start making some decisions. 1 Peter 5, 1-5. 1 Peter 5, 1-5 says, "Therefore I exhort the elders among you," again mentioned in the plural, "as your fellow elder and witness of the sufferings of Christ and a partaker also of the glory of God that is to be revealed, shepherd the flock of God among you." Notice, exercising oversight. So what does an elder do? He shepherds and he exercises oversight. He's an overseer. Notice he's not to do it under compulsion. And then in verse 4 it talks about that Christ is the chief shepherd. So as we're again, this is one of those corporate solidarity issues. We're small s shepherds and he's the chief shepherd. But then notice verse 5, "You younger men likewise be subject to your elders." So it's talking about being subject to elders. Does that have any implications for authority within the church? Now let's go to James. James chapter 5. James chapter 5, verses 13 to 15. Says, "Is anyone among you suffering? Then he must pray. Is anyone cheerful? He is to sing praises. Is anyone among you sick? Then he must call for the elders of the church." So it talks about, notice that there's a church that has elders, and you're to call for the elders. The elders of the church, and they are to pray over him, anointing him with oil in the name of the Lord. Then it talks about forgiveness there. And then let's go to Hebrews 13:17. Hebrews 13:17 talks about obey your leaders. Now, it doesn't call them elders there, but he does say leaders. "Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they keep watch over your souls as those who will give an account. Let them do this with joy," etc. So it talks about leaders. We're to submit to them. They keep watch over your souls as those who will give an account. Now, when it comes to the last category here that I have mentioned here on the church government, there's references here. These passages here in particular are going to be used by those who believe in that there can be single elder rule. Because you have the messages of I'm not going to go through all these, but these are the messages to the angel/messenger of the churches. So now you get into an issue: is it a literal angel or is it a human messenger? But some will say these are human messengers, and then when it comes to the letters to the 7 churches, these are messages to the messenger, which many would see as the single leader of a church. So those who are going to argue for the single eldership are going to make a big deal out of this, and they'll also argue, hey, in church history that ended up being true. There ended up developing to be certain leaders that would appear to have the primary authority. Okay. All right, so that was a whirlwind, right? That was a whirlwind survey. Now, part of the reason I did the whirlwind is because I do want to come back and kind of run what we've talked about again through these. And by the way, just so you know, I'm trying to cover what I think I want to get covered in lieu of your application project that's coming up. We're not done talking about church government, so we'll be talking more about it next week, and we'll get into qualifications. But there's certain things I told myself I want to cover these things before this class ends, so that's what I'm kind of moving through. Okay, now in lieu of those passages that we've looked at, which I think are the primary ones, maybe not exhaustive, but pretty close. When it comes to the Episcopal form of church government, this is the way that I like to do things. In light of the biblical data, can I take certain ones off the board? I consider Episcopal totally unacceptable. I don't see this three-tier distinction. I certainly don't see apostolic authority. I don't see the authority of a church lying in a succession of bishops. So I find the Episcopal form of government to me, its best argument is basically a historical argument. But as far as a biblical argument, I don't, I'm not seeing that. So basically what I'm doing is I'm telling you how I'm seeing it, and then of course I'll be interested to hear your guys' input on it as well. When it comes to the Presbyterian form of government, my critique of it is less harsh than the Episcopal. As a matter of fact, there's obviously a lot of godly people that are functioning within this, and I would even say I'm sure that there are good things and wisdom and sorts of things that are taking place within that structure. I personally don't see the connectionalism. Again, that is not a statement that churches working together and helping each other and all that. That's not a statement that can't happen. But to me, this particular approach is almost so, well, I shouldn't say, let's just put it this way. Presbyterians are going to form a lot of what elder rule people may say in regard to elders, so there's a lot of similarity, but I'm not seeing the connectionalism from Acts 15. I think you have apostolic authority, which is the issue in Acts 15. And I think it's describing what's taking place and isn't prescriptive as a model. So one of the reasons why I would not hold to Presbyterian is I don't see connectionalism. I don't see it in Acts 15, and I don't see it as a mandated model. So that's not where I would be. So I think to me, the legitimate options are going to come within congregational. Now, there's certain ones that I think I can take off the board with this. No government, I'm taking that off the board. I'm not seeing pure democracy either. Again, that's not a statement that you can't have the whole congregation that's part of the process and in the sense of being used by those who are in authority, but I don't see just a pure democracy. So thus, when I'm looking at this, I think the more possible options are going to come down to B, C, and E. And when I say that more possible, like I try to think of myself, like when I look at all these forms of government, like where could I function and be comfortable? If I were candidating and there was a certain one that had that singular authority, if that's kind of how they've been doing things, perhaps by default, I wouldn't necessarily rule that out, just a priori under no circumstances whatsoever. I definitely think that I think the ones that end up being the closest to the biblical standard are going to be C and E. That's where I think the and I'm an E guy. I'll just let you know that. That's my position there. I think I could and have functioned within this. I think I could function within this. I think I could perhaps even function within that. If I was in B, I probably, not overnight and not in an offensive, abrupt way, but hopefully be able to transfer it to what I would consider to be a more biblical approach. But I'm just saying, for me, I think the ones that would be acceptable would be B, C, and E. And then if you want to narrow it down to that, I think C and E. And then I do, based on Hebrews, particularly those last passages that we looked at, Hebrews 13:7, what we saw in 1 Peter 5, there seems to be a real leadership authority that the elders have. They're the ones that have the charge. We're to be subject to them. So I tend to be, leaning that way. So I want to strike the balance here because I do believe, that would be the one that I hold to, but it's not a statement that there's not other forms of government that are being effective or that this is the only model that you can be in. Okay, what do you guys think? Go ahead, Thomas and Tavis.
Well, with C, I came from a church that is like that, and it seemed to me that the congregational vote was mainly for major financial decisions, like investing or building project or some kind of new ministry thing that's going to. Basically, it's a financial commitment. huge financial commitment that it seems like it's more like just getting, just, you know, are you going to be on board with this? Because this is what we think. Here's why we think this is going to be a great ministry or a great decision, the best decision for the church.
Yeah.
But other than that, the elders, it pretty much was elder-led. I mean, they made decisions and they had a lot of stuff they didn't even mention the congregation. They didn't have to. So aren't there some churches where they might have a couple instances
Yeah.
where you do have a vote, but they still would probably
Right.
be under E, even though you might have a couple
Right.
things that you would
In a
say-
sense, there could be some areas where it's delegated, where the choice is with the congregation. So I think you can have those
Right.
within that. Not only just approval, or it's wise to see what they're thinking, but perhaps at certain points to even grant them within that. Now, guys, I do want you to know that I do understand that because we're dealing in a fallen world and even believers still struggle with sin, there's no doubt this, as any form of government, can be abused. I mean, I could go for 2 hours on abuses of this. But the fact that there's abuses doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't work, because I think you can see, I mean, which of these could we not go through and find abuses within that? So I want to affirm that I think within this, I think a lot of times when people talk about elder rule, they're thinking of put everybody under their thumb and we don't care what the congregation thinks. I mean, I think, you know, I personally think that within this model here, that there should, congregational participation should be vigorously sought. And I think if you're going to end up making decisions that are going against what the congregation wants, again, that's a recipe for disaster. It may reflect on your leadership. I mean, if you believe X and everybody else feels Y, you may have a lot of instructing to do. Or so. All right. What else do you guys think? That's right, Tavis. I had you next. Then we'll go back here. Okay.
It seems like you could have a situation, though, with congregational and connectionalism. For example, you have a church that is 3E, yet they have missionaries that they have sent out who, if those missionaries go astray doctrinally, well, you're off the mission team, you know? So, like, we're not going to support you anymore.
Right.
So wouldn't that be a form of connectionalism, where you have a governing...
Yeah, it's like missionaries that go to, that's being supported by, like, in a sense, a mother church in the States, and they go somewhere and they're a part of another church. But if they stray their connections, or they would go doctrinally.
The doctrinal stance of the home church.
Yeah. So in that sense, you're having kind of a dual commitment, because they have a commitment with the one. I mean, I think it's. I mean, that's
just like a functional necessity then in that situation.
Yeah, I don't know if that would be. I mean, if they're still drawing their support and their whole ability is being linked with the other, it still would seem to be that that's where the authority is. So I don't know. I mean, so in that sense, I don't know if I would call it a pure connectionalism. And you're definitely intersecting with two groups that have a stake in things: the actual local church and then the sending church. But if that person's authority is still, I mean, if their ability to function is still linked with the mother, that still seems to be probably where their primary commitment is, I think. Yep.
I'm with you. I think Scripture teaches 3E, but when I was reading Salsi's book,
Yeah.
I was thrown back by church history so early on, having leaders over regions. I was like,
Yeah,
what in the
that's
world?
true. And that's, like I said, that's the main argument for the single leader and the bishop argument, is more the church history, I think.
But it seems like it was within like 100 AD. I mean, so
Yeah.
fast.
Yeah.
So
Right.
how much importance do you give to that, if any?
Yeah. Well, I would say, of course, it's significant. But the thing is I guess the key issue is what the Scripture says. I mean, there's all kinds of areas where things start to go as they shouldn't pretty early on. I mean, we start to get infant baptism going on fairly early on too. So, I think you can make a strong case biblically for the multiple elder. I mean, we're seeing that. I mean, we're just seeing that all over the place in Acts as that's being described, and that is true for the first century church, and it is true going even into the second century. So you do have that too. So it's not just the case as soon as the apostles died off, it's all single elder. So you have both. Yeah.
The history is against the multiple elder. I'm
Yeah.
saying that this connectionalism of like somebody overseeing like multiple churches seemed like that's what Salsi was saying.
Right.
With this leadership. And I don't know. It was interesting.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, you do have that particularly over regions. So, what do you say as far as the question, as far as like?
I'm saying how much emphasis do that church history play into your thinking on it too? I guess not much if
Yeah.
the Bible doesn't.
Yeah. Again, I think there's the balance. I mean, the authority is the Scripture and what appears to be the model that it's given. We don't want to totally ignore the church history part of it, but I just personally think that's an area where things started to drift badly, as in other areas that started to drift around that time. Yep.
It seems like church history shows that the explosion of congregational model happens when you have more people able to read the scripture in their language, so that the authority comes back to the scripture, as opposed to being relied upon those who actually could read it or had an availability to the scripture. They were always looking to...
Yeah. So access and ability
Yeah.
to read and all that sort of
It
thing.
seems like, yeah, that brings the authority back to the local congregation.
Yeah,
as
because
opposed
they
to
have the
relying
apostles
upon-
teaching in the Scripture. Yeah, I think that's a good point.